There is a truth about love that few are willing to admit. We do not attract what we want, we attract what we are. If your heart is fractured, if you carry a silent belief that you are unworthy, you will naturally invite people into your life who mirror that same belief back to you. But when you love yourself enough, truly, deeply enough, something extraordinary happens. You no longer chase love, you no longer beg for it. Instead, you become it, and the right person, the one who sees your light without trying to dim it, will be drawn to you like a moth to flame. Today, I want to share 5 truths about how loving yourself transforms not only your life, but also the kind of person you invite into it. When we speak of love for oneself, we must first understand that it is not an inflated sense of pride or a narcissistic obsession with the self, but an inner acknowledgement of one's inherent worth. It is the quiet yet unshakable awareness that your existence has meaning, that your dignity is non-negotiable, and that your well-being is a sacred responsibility you carry toward yourself. This is the foundation upon which every relationship you will ever have is built. Whether you are aware of it or not, the way you treat yourself becomes the invisible standard you set for others. Without uttering a word, you reveal to the world how they may approach you, how they may speak to you, and how deeply they may respect or disregard you. If you constantly criticize your own body, undermine your own intelligence, or allow yourself to be diminished in the name of keeping the peace, you are silently declaring to others, "This is enough for me, you need not offer more." The human psyche is sensitive to such signals. People respond to the energy you project. They sense, even without conscious thought, whether you see yourself as worthy of kindness or as someone who must settle for scraps. And once that message is absorbed, it becomes the lens through which they relate to you. There was a woman named Sarah who lived much of her life believing that her misfortunes in love were a matter of chance. She moved through relationships with men who undervalued her, who treated her as an afterthought rather than a priority. Birthdays were forgotten, her dreams were dismissed, and her emotional needs were met with indifference. She told herself she was unlucky, as though love were a lottery she simply had not won. But beneath this belief was an unspoken truth. Sarah had been treating herself in much the same way. She was careless with her own needs, quick to dismiss her own desires, and reluctant to speak up when she felt hurt or unseen. She did not yet recognize that the world was mirroring her own posture toward herself. Change began not with an external event, but with an internal decision, a subtle shift toward self-respect. She began journaling, not to record the events of her day, but to listen to the quiet voice within her that she had long ignored. She wrote about her disappointments, her hopes, her boundaries, and in doing so began to see patterns that had been invisible to her before. She took better care of her body, not to meet a standard of beauty set by others, but because she began to see her health as an act of reverence toward herself. She started to speak more kindly to herself, to catch the moments when her own thoughts were harsher than any critic's words. It was not an overnight transformation. There were days when old habits called to her, when the urge to respond to a late-night message out of loneliness was strong. But each time she chose not to betray herself for a fleeting sense of attention, she grew stronger. She began to decline invitations from people who only reached out when it was convenient for them. She stopped explaining or apologizing for her boundaries, and slowly the quality of people in her life began to shift. The men who once kept her in a limbo of half-hearted affection faded away, not because she pushed them, but because her presence no longer offered the same comfort to their lack of commitment. They could feel the difference, even if they could not name it, the difference between a woman who will tolerate being undervalued and one who knows she is worth more. Into the space they left came others, friends who listened deeply, who shared her joy in her successes, a man who remembered the small details of her stories, who encouraged her ambitions rather than diminished them. This was not magic. It was the natural consequence of living in alignment with her own worth. The psyche is like a mirror, reflecting into the outer world the truths we carry about ourselves. When you set your standard through self-love, you do not need to shout it from rooftops. It is evident in your choices, your presence, and the energy you hold. The right people will feel it and draw closer, while the wrong ones will drift away. The difficulty for most lies in the courage this requires. It is not easy to hold yourself to a higher standard when loneliness whispers that lowering it would bring company. It is not easy to walk away from those who give you fragments of affection when you long for love in its fullness. Yet, every time you betray yourself for the comfort of someone else's approval, you reinforce the belief that you are undeserving of more. Self-love demands that you endure the discomfort of growth. It asks you to be patient when your standards narrow the pool of those who can remain in your life. It challenges you to sit with solitude until the people who enter are those who truly match your energy. This patience is not empty waiting, it is an active shaping of your reality. Each moment you treat yourself with dignity is a moment you build the foundation for others to do the same. Many misunderstand self-love as a self-contained act, as if it exists only within the private realm of the individual. But in truth it is relational. It extends outward, shaping how the world engages with you. Imagine a person who walks into a room with their head held low, speaking apologetically for taking up space. Without saying a word, they tell others, "I am not worth much attention." Now imagine another who enters with a quiet calm, whose eyes meet yours without flinching, whose words are measured and intentional. Both people may say the same things, but the way they are received will be entirely different. The first invites disregard, the second invites respect. Sarah became the second kind of person, not because she forced others to change, but because she changed herself. She came to understand that loving herself was not about perfection or self-indulgence, but about setting a standard for what was acceptable in her life. This standard was not rigid, it was rooted in compassion for herself and for others. But it was firm enough that those who could not honor it could no longer find a place beside her, and this is the lesson. The world will treat you in accordance with the standards you live by, not the ones you merely speak about. You may declare that you deserve kindness, but if you accept cruelty, that declaration holds no weight. You may insist that you value honesty, but if you tolerate deceit, the standard collapses. It is in the lived reality of your choices that your worth is communicated. To love yourself enough to set such a standard is to take full responsibility for your inner and outer life. It is to understand that the quality of your relationships will always reflect the relationship you have with yourself. And when that relationship is built on respect, care, and authenticity, it becomes impossible for those who would diminish you to remain. What remains, then, is not the emptiness of loss, but the fullness of relationships that reflect the love you have cultivated within. There is a kind of hunger that hides itself well, the hunger for approval. It begins quietly, almost innocently, as the wish to be liked, to be accepted, to be seen. But when love for oneself has not yet taken root, this wish can swell into a dependence until your very sense of worth is held in the fragile hands of others. You wait for their words, for their gestures, for their signs of acceptance, and when they come, you feel whole for a moment. When they do not, you crumble. This is the prison of seeking validation, and it is built from the belief that you are incomplete on your own. When you do not yet know your own value, you unconsciously hand over the keys to your identity to anyone who shows you a little warmth. They can lift you to the sky with a single compliment, and they can drop you into the shadows with a single criticism. You live as a mirror for their opinions rather than as a light that shines from within. This is why desperation repels, because it signals that your inner stability is absent, that you are not a rooted tree but a leaf in the wind, blown in whatever direction the world chooses to take you. But something profound happens when you begin to love yourself in truth, not just in theory. The roots grow deep. You stop asking others to define you because you already know who you are. You stop chasing scraps of reassurance because you carry the quiet knowledge of your worth inside you. This inner security changes everything about the way you move through the world. Your shoulders relax, your gaze steadies, your words are less hurried, and your presence no longer begs to be acknowledged. You begin to radiate something that cannot be faked, confidence that is not loud but undeniable. Confidence is not arrogance. Arrogance is the fragile armor of those who are still uncertain within. True confidence is the absence of the need to prove anything. It is the calm of someone who does not measure their value by comparison or competition. This is why people are drawn to it, because it carries the scent of freedom. In the presence of someone who is whole, others feel safe to be themselves. They sense there is no silent demand for validation, no hidden contract that says, "Make me feel worthy." Instead, there is openness, and openness invites connection. Consider for a moment the difference between two people entering the same room. One scans the space quickly, searching for faces that will approve of them, adjusting their posture depending on who is watching, laughing louder than they feel, or staying silent out of fear of judgment. The other moves with quiet steadiness, not oblivious to others but not beholden to their reactions. They engage when they wish, they listen without needing to impress, and they leave without wondering if they were liked. More often than not, it is the second person who leaves the strongest impression. The first asks for energy, the second offers it. Social psychology has long observed this truth. Self-assured individuals are consistently perceived as more attractive, regardless of their physical appearance. People cannot always explain why, but they feel it, the difference between someone whose self-image rests on their own foundation and someone whose sense of self is borrowed from others. It is not the symmetry of the face or the perfection of the body that draws us in, but the energy that radiates from within. This is why two people with similar outward features can be received entirely differently. One projects need, the other projects completeness. The journey from seeking validation to radiating confidence is not about becoming immune to praise or criticism. It is about no longer being ruled by them. Praise becomes a kind acknowledgement, not a lifeline. Criticism becomes an opinion, not a verdict. You begin to engage with the world not to gain approval, but to express the truth of who you are. This shift is subtle yet transformative. You will notice it in the way you speak up without rehearsing your words in fear, in the way you make decisions without asking for permission, in the way you walk away from situations that do not honor your integrity. Many resist this journey because the dependency on external validation feels familiar, and familiarity can be comforting even when it is painful. To step away from it is to stand in a space where you alone are responsible for affirming your worth, and this requires courage. But the courage is rewarded 100-fold, because once you find stability within yourself, No one can take it from you. You can lose approval, attention, even admiration, and still remain whole. When you carry this kind of self-possession, it is felt before it is seen. Others may not be able to name why they are drawn to you, but they will notice the ease in your presence. You will find that conversations flow more naturally, that connections deepen without force, and that opportunities seem to open more readily. This is not luck. It is the natural magnetism of someone who does not need the world to tell them who they are. Desperation creates noise, confidence creates space. In desperation, your energy reaches outward, grasping, pulling, trying to hold. In confidence, your energy settles inward, steady, grounded, inviting others to step into it without pressure. This is why people instinctively lean toward those who are rooted. They sense the stability and are drawn to it, even if they do not consciously understand why. I have seen lives transform when this shift takes place. People who once molded themselves to fit the expectations of others begin to express their own tastes, ideas, and desires without fear. They dress in ways that feel authentic rather than in ways that will be approved. They choose partners who respect their boundaries instead of those who only validate their insecurities. They pursue work that excites them rather than work that merely impresses others. And perhaps most importantly, they begin to enjoy their own company. There is a particular freedom in reaching the point where you do not need constant proof of your value. You still appreciate love, appreciation, and kindness, but you do not depend on them for survival. This is the threshold where true self-love flourishes, and from this soil, real confidence grows. It is the kind of confidence that does not just attract the attention of others, but inspires them. When people witness someone living without the weight of constant self-doubt, they are reminded that they, too, can step out of the prison of seeking validation. And so, when you love yourself enough, the endless search for external approval begins to lose its grip. You no longer need to be completed, because you are already whole. You no longer fear losing someone's admiration, because it is not the source of your identity. Instead, you carry yourself with the quiet power of someone who knows they belong not because anyone said so, but because they have claimed that truth for themselves. This is the essence of radiating confidence. It is not performed, it is lived. What you experience in your relationships is not only the result of chance encounters or the randomness of life. It is deeply bound to what you hold as true about yourself, often far beneath the surface of your conscious mind. There is an unseen script, written quietly over the years, that shapes how you relate to others and how they relate to you. It is in the silent convictions you carry when no one is watching, in the thoughts you accept without question, in the stories you tell yourself about who you are and what you are allowed to have. These inner beliefs, especially the unexamined ones, act as powerful magnets. They draw toward you people and experiences that confirm what you already believe, even if those beliefs bring you pain. So many live with the quiet weight of sentences like, "I am not good enough," or "love never lasts for me," or "if someone truly knew me, they wouldn't stay." These are not just words, they are lenses through which you see the world. They color your interpretations, guide your reactions, and shape your choices. And in the strange yet consistent way the psyche works, they become self-fulfilling prophecies. You choose partners who match your inner doubt. You interpret kindness as temporary and fleeting. You sabotage what is healthy because it feels unfamiliar, and you cling to what is toxic because it feels like home. I knew a man named David who, for most of his adult life, moved through relationships that left him hollow. Each partner, in different ways, drained him emotionally. He would give and give his time, his energy, his peace, until there was almost nothing left for himself. Yet he believed that this was the cost of love, that to be loved he had to prove his worth through constant sacrifice. The more he gave, the more they seemed to take, and when the relationships eventually ended, he would tell himself the same story, that love simply wasn't meant to be effortless for him, that maybe some people were destined for reciprocity and others for struggle. It wasn't until we began to examine the root of his pattern that the truth emerged. Somewhere in his early years, he had learned that affection came at a price, that it had to be earned by meeting others' needs first, often at the expense of his own. This belief had become the blueprint for every relationship thereafter. Without realizing it, he was drawn to those who would demand from him, because such dynamics matched his inner map of how love operates. When David began to confront this belief, the process was not instantaneous. It required patience, discomfort, and a willingness to question the familiar. He had to sit with the idea that love did not have to be purchased through exhaustion, that he was worthy of it simply by existing. This felt almost unnatural at first, because when you have lived in self-denial for years, self-acceptance can feel foreign, even unsafe. But slowly, he began to test this new belief in small ways, saying no to demands that depleted him, allowing himself to receive without rushing to repay, and noticing when genuine affection came without hidden conditions. As he rewrote his inner script, his outer world began to reflect the change. The kinds of people who once held his attention no longer interested him. Their constant taking felt heavy rather than familiar. In their place came those who valued balance, who wanted to share life rather than drain it. A year later, he was in a relationship that flowed without constant negotiation for his dignity. Love was no longer a transaction, it was an exchange of equals, and for the first time he did not feel he had to disappear to keep it. This is the mystery and the power of self-perception. The outer world mirrors the inner one. If you believe you are unworthy, you will accept and often unconsciously seek situations that affirm that belief. You will rationalize poor treatment, excuse harmful behavior, and interpret it as the best you can expect. If you believe that you are worthy of love that uplifts and respects you, you will not tolerate what dishonors you. This is not arrogance, it is alignment with truth. The challenge, of course, is that these inner beliefs are not always visible to you. They can be hidden beneath layers of habit, culture, and past experiences. You may think you are seeking love freely, but if your heart still carries the conviction that love is unsafe, you will turn away from it when it arrives. You may believe you are open to kindness, but if you secretly think you do not deserve it, you will dismiss it or doubt it until it fades. To change what you attract, you must first become aware of what you believe. This requires a willingness to look within with honesty, to notice the quiet narratives you repeat to yourself. Do you believe that people will leave you? Do you believe that your value depends on what you give, what you earn, or how you look? Do you believe that love is something that can only be won, never freely given? Every relationship you enter will, in some way, echo these beliefs back to you. When you truly love yourself, you begin to rewrite the script. You start to hold different expectations, not from a place of entitlement, but from a place of knowing your worth. You begin to think, I am worthy of respect. I am worthy of kindness. I am worthy of love that uplifts me. And when these beliefs take root, they alter the very energy you carry into the world. You speak differently, you choose differently, you walk away sooner from what does not serve you. And because the psyche and the external world are in constant dialogue, the people and circumstances around you adjust to meet the standard you now live by. This is not a mystical trick or some abstract philosophy. It is a practical truth. Your boundaries, your choices, your reactions, all of them are shaped by what you believe you deserve, and those boundaries and choices shape the relationships you end up keeping. When you operate from the belief that you are deserving, you will not cling to what harms you. When you know your value, you will not shrink to fit someone else's comfort. David's transformation was a living example of this. The change did not come because the world suddenly offered him better partners. It came because he stopped agreeing to be less than himself in order to be loved. Once he held himself in higher regard, the kind of love that required him to vanish could no longer survive in his presence. And so it is with all of us. The relationships you experience are not merely random intersections of fate, they are often reflections of your own unseen convictions. To change them, you must first change the beliefs that call them to you. Love yourself enough to write a new story, and the world will learn to read from it. There is a certain paradox in the human heart. The more terrified we are of being alone, the more likely we are to cling to people and situations that diminish us. We imagine that solitude is a void, a barren wasteland in which we will wither. And so, in our desperation to avoid it, we often accept less than we deserve, remain silent when we should speak, and hold on when we should let go. Yet the truth is that the fear of loneliness is not born from the absence of others, but from the absence of connection to ourselves. It is not the empty room that scares us, it is the echo of our own unspoken thoughts. When you begin to love yourself deeply, this fear starts to dissolve. Solitude stops being a shadow that follows you and instead becomes a warm light you can sit in. You no longer dread an empty Saturday night, because you understand that it is not empty at all, it is full of possibility. It is space to read a book that awakens your mind, to walk through a park and notice the way sunlight dances on leaves, to cook a meal slowly and savor each flavor, to listen to music that stirs something ancient in your soul. You stop treating time alone as something to be filled, and start treating it as something to be lived. This shift changes everything. When you are comfortable with yourself, you do not tolerate relationships built on dependency, manipulation, or convenience. You are no longer impressed by someone simply because they choose you. You begin to ask whether they deserve you. And because you are already fulfilled within, you no longer try to twist yourself into whatever shape someone else might prefer. You meet people as you are, and you let them meet you as you are. The connection becomes a meeting of equals, not a rescue mission. Many people think that confidence is built in the presence of others, through admiration, compliments, or attention. But real confidence is forged in the quiet hours when no one is watching. It is born in the moments when you sit with your own thoughts, confront your own fears, and choose to stay. It is in these moments that you discover you are not as fragile as you once believed. You begin to see that your worth is not a reflection in someone else's eyes. It is a flame you carry within you. I recall a young woman who once told me she was terrified of being alone. Her life had been a series of relationships with little space in between, and when one ended, she rushed into the next as though she were escaping a burning building. When she began the work of self-love, I asked her to spend one weekend entirely by herself, no social media, no friends, no dates, just her and her thoughts. She resisted at first, convinced it would be unbearable. But by the end of the second day, she had written in her journal, "I am beginning to hear myself again." That weekend was the beginning of her liberation, and within months her choices in love shifted dramatically. She no longer fell into relationships out of fear. She entered them out of genuine desire. Solitude, when embraced, becomes a sanctuary for growth. It is where you can explore interests that belong only to you, where you can sharpen your mind and deepen your understanding of life. It is the soil in which self-awareness blooms. Just as a gardener knows that a seed must be nurtured in the right conditions before it can grow strong, so too must you cultivate your inner life before you can truly share it with another. Without this foundation, love easily becomes entangled with need, and need easily becomes the chains that bind you. And here lies the irony. When you no longer fear being alone, you become far more magnetic to others. You are no longer seeking someone to complete you, which makes your presence lighter, freer. People are drawn to those who are whole in themselves, because such people do not demand constant reassurance or drain others with unspoken needs. They can give freely because they have something to give, and in this giving, love flourishes without the weight of desperation. Imagine your life as a garden. If you neglect it, the soil becomes hard, weeds take root, and nothing of value grows. In such a state, if someone were to walk through, they might see potential, but they would also see work you expect them to do for you. But if you have tended your garden, watered it, cared for it, allowed flowers to bloom, then anyone who enters is stepping into beauty you have already created. They are not there to save it, only to appreciate it. And in that appreciation, both of you can walk together without fear of losing yourselves. This is why loving yourself enough to be comfortable with solitude is so powerful. It removes the illusion that you need someone in order to be whole. It teaches you that your life, even in the absence of a romantic partner, can be rich, meaningful, and joyful. And when you know this in your bones, you choose love not as a lifeline, but as a celebration, an addition to an already full life. In the end, it is not the absence of others we must fear, but the absence of ourselves. And once we have found ourselves, we are never truly alone again. When you truly love yourself, something subtle yet profound begins to happen. You radiate a kind of quiet confidence, a steady flame that does not waver in the winds of doubt or the storms of insecurity. It is not arrogance, nor is it pride. It is the deep and unshakable knowing that you are enough as you are. And when you live in this space, you send out an unspoken invitation to others. You too can stand in your truth. You too can be unafraid to show who you really are. This is the power of authenticity, and authenticity is magnetic. We often think attraction is about the surface, the way someone looks, the way they speak, the image they project. But these are only masks, and masks eventually fall. Real attraction, the kind that lasts, the kind that binds two souls together through the changing seasons of life, comes from resonance. It comes from the recognition of one soul by another, a meeting that says, "Here I am safe. Here I do not have to pretend." But this kind of meeting cannot happen when we are still hiding from ourselves. If we are full of shame, if we believe ourselves unworthy, if we are constantly adjusting who we are to fit someone else's expectations, then we unconsciously invite others to do the same. Two masks may meet, but masks cannot love each other. When you live from self-love, you shed the need to disguise yourself. You speak honestly, not to hurt, but to be clear. You set boundaries not as walls, but as the natural edges of a healthy self. And in doing so, you create an environment where another person feels they can do the same. Your steadiness reassures them. They do not need to earn your acceptance by becoming something they are not. They do not need to shrink so you can feel bigger, nor grow beyond themselves to keep your interest. They can simply be, and in a world that constantly pressures people to perform, that is a rare gift. This is why healthy people are drawn to healthy people, not because perfection recognizes perfection, but because health recognizes safety. When you are emotionally balanced, you do not play games. You do not bait with affection and withdraw it for control. You do not need constant reassurance to fill an empty place inside you. You can receive love without suspicion, and you can give it without keeping score. This stability is deeply attractive, not in a loud, attention-grabbing way, but in the same way a steady flame attracts those who are tired of the cold. Imagine two people meeting from this place. Neither is trying to rescue the other, because both have learned to rescue themselves. Neither is trying to fill a void, because they have already filled it with their own self-respect, their own purpose, their own joy. There is no desperate grasping for validation, no unspoken bargain of "I will love you so that you will make me whole." Instead, there is a quiet mutual recognition: I am whole and I choose to walk beside you. Relationships born from this foundation feel different. They are lighter, freer, and yet more rooted. They do not depend on constant drama to feel alive, because the aliveness comes from the authenticity of the bond. You may have seen what happens when the opposite is true, when two people come together not from wholeness, but from emptiness. In such relationships, love becomes a transaction, a currency of control. Every disagreement feels threatening because it shakes the fragile scaffolding propping up their sense of worth. Every moment apart feels dangerous because the other person is the only source of comfort. In these cases, masks are worn tightly, and true selves are hidden away, because showing them might risk rejection, and so the connection becomes shallow, even if it feels intense. But when you operate from self-love, you change the equation entirely. You no longer search for someone to give you what you have not yet given yourself. You no longer mistake intensity for intimacy, and without realizing it, you signal to the right person that it is safe for them to step forward without their armor. They do not have to guess what you want, you will tell them. They do not have to fix you to feel important, you are already whole. And so their value is not in repairing you, but in sharing with you. I once heard of a woman who spent years in relationships where she played a smaller role than she truly was capable of, fearing that her full self might intimidate her partners. Each time she dimmed her light just enough to keep the peace, and each time she was left feeling unseen. Then, after a period of solitude, she began to rebuild herself not for anyone else, but for her own soul. She pursued her passions, learned new skills, surrounded herself with people who valued her honesty, and most importantly, stopped apologizing for her own brilliance. When she finally met the man who would become her husband, she noticed something remarkable. She had not tried to impress him, and he had not tried to impress her. They simply showed up as themselves. And because there was nothing to hide, there was nothing to fear. This is the essence of inspiring the right person to show up authentically. You make it possible by doing it yourself first. If you want a partner who is honest, be honest. If you want a partner who is emotionally present, be emotionally present. If you want a partner who respects themselves enough to live with integrity, begin by respecting yourself in the same way. People may be drawn to the image you project, but they will stay for the truth you embody. It takes courage to live this way because authenticity is vulnerable. It means some people will walk away, not because you are unworthy, but because they are not ready to be seen in the same way you are willing to be seen. This is not a loss, it is a blessing. Every person who leaves because they cannot meet you in your authenticity makes space for the one who can. And when that person arrives, there will be no need for pretense, no games, no constant effort to read between the lines. There will only be the shared relief of two people who can breathe in each other's presence, because neither is holding their breath in fear. When two whole people choose each other, the relationship becomes a meeting of equals, a collaboration rather than a dependency. You do not walk in each other's shadows, nor do you try to outshine each other. Instead, You walk side by side, both carrying your own light, both illuminating the path ahead. And in that light there is freedom, there is safety, and there is the kind of love that does not fade when the masks come off, because there were never any masks to begin with. The journey to loving yourself is not a selfish act. It's the most generous thing you can do for yourself and for the person who is meant to walk beside you. Love yourself enough to know your worth. Love yourself enough to walk away from what diminishes you. Love yourself enough to be patient for what you deserve, because when you love yourself enough, you will not need to search for the right person. You will become the kind of person the right one can't help but find.